which
Alright,
collaborative going
so
to
I would
first?
probably first do the permutation. That's the first thing I'm gonna do. After I prepare my arguments. Then I'm gonna go to well the language of the argument. To I guess extend out Toni Morrison's arguments. Take note of what it is. And then I'm gonna go to the framework. And then I'm back. I think I'm just gonna go back on the case. Basically, Judge, let's start it off. That permutation is flawed because we established that a new norm of language, and to the point where they use the permutation, the point where they drop all their arguments. Because the whole point of our argument is to destroy the language that is in the current debate paradigm. You cite our arguments, we talk about the current paradigm as seeing the affirmative as an inorganic third-person position. They clearly conceded to they can concede to the permutation that they destroy all the United States federal government presence in their whole act. So basically, Judge, they basically sink themselves in a hole they can't get out of. And now it's too late in the debate round because they conceded that the permutation should be a voter. So basically, Judge, they use the language that we talked about in Toni Morrison's argument. Since we run an alternative that's based on language and is based on cohesiveness, they don't see our arguments as legitimate. If you cross out Toni Morrison 93 argument where he talks about the only way to give any policy, both the 1AC and the 2AC, basically said the only way you can give any type of policy is running United States federal government. This is exactly what Toni Morrison talks about, is that to the point where they sit here in the debate round and say, we don't make any change. You just sit here and talk. They don't make any change whatsoever. They sit here and argue about prisons, and they sit here and argue about the notion of how prisons are bad. When they get out, they get traumatized. But they don't do anything outside the debate round themselves. I don't hear them going outside the debate round talking about prisons and us. They just picked it. This is a different argument that they ran before they even debated against us. They ran a different argument talking about I think it was something else, but it wasn't this. So basically, Judge, we have a clear argument. We've been rubbing this argument since the very beginning of this debate round. We've been studying this argument for 3 years. This is an argument that we've been studying to prove my point. I've read a red book. I create this book to use analyticals to establish a connection to I have to the stuff I read. If they want to get into the evidence, this is the live evidence right here to the connection to what I have to my arguments. And again, they link directly to the Toni Morrison arguments. This should be a voter throughout the debate round. All they're going to do is continue reading how their impacts are so good, or how their impacts are so modified, and they do this great thing. But if you cross the argument that my partner read, where he talked about the dehumanizing effects of the prisons, where he talks about, like, much like the Middle Passage, prisons are not merely a special location, but they are a capsule process. Where the point where they don't talk about the capsule process is exactly what we're talking about. They're putting a band-aid on his shotgun wound. Or it's like a rape bullet. If he says, oh yeah, I'm going to rape you, then I'm going to give you $1, and then say, go off on your Molly way. They don't end up when they never talk about directly about the capsule process. Then they say they're going to provide social services to get rid of that trauma that they get out of that process. By us talking about that process, that's what makes us better than the affirmative. Because we talk directly why the reason why they're providing those so-called social services in the first place. And to go to that notion where he goes on about predictability, the reason through the crosses I kept asking him about predictability, when is revolution ever predictable? When is change ever predictable? So they're going to sit here and argue that, yeah, we must be able to predict our arguments so they can predict our resolution so it can be more educational. It's more educational when arguments that are different and against the status quo so we can have ways to challenge different paradigms like capitalism. That is the true value of our argument. Not being predictable is the only reason why we push our arguments, because the very fact that a lot of people do not like challenge the broad system of capitalism because nobody wants to talk about it. And then they use language to cancel us out and say that we're not legitimate. This is again why we do these arguments, by showing that our arguments and our style and our methodology of debate is legitimate. It's not illegitimate because we don't use plan text, solipsism, or counter plans. And basically, Judge, they're using the same language as the direct link to the Toni Morrison arguments. Then they say we're being competitive, that we destroy competitors. The very act that they're sitting here debating against us says that they have arguments against our framework shows that there is a level of competitiveness in the debate round. So to sit here and say there's no level of competitiveness in the debate round is false. Because the very act they can pull a different framework and sit here and try to debate different methodologies shows that there's a certain level of competitiveness in the debate round. And then they when he talks about the solvency, that the only way we can have true alternative to the argument is utopian. We never talk about a utopian ideology. All we're saying is that by forcing anti-Marxism in the U.S. is critical to further revolution. Any revolution starts like this. Any revolution starts with cohesion and discussion. This is again why the affirmative not better. They don't even talk about the discussion for connection narratives. They basically incite my Cornell West arguments. They basically uphold the same corporate market institution ethics that use arguments and basic narratives as commodities. They use those prisoners' narratives as commodities to push an ideal that they even say they don't have a connection to. So to sit here and argue about it, the reason why our framework is better, because me and Khalil directly talk about how capitalism affects our lives. They sit here and talk about different people, how prisons affect, I guess this torture affect their lives. This what separates the ab from the neg. Because we as debaters in this room talk about the system of the theory of capitalism affects our lives. They just commodify those arguments and use those as advantages and to try them in the same debate jargon that they try to push throughout the debate round. So they basically commodify the arguments, they cite that argument, but it's clear that corporate market institutions have greatly contributed to the undermining traditional modality in order to stay in business and make a profit. Reduction of individuals to objects. So when they don't make a connection to the narratives directly to them, they use those same narratives as objects. Objects to define their own ideology. And they they can have it right there, right there. And go to that again when she talks about building up the walls. This is again what we're talking about. That by talking about the problems and the economic effect that prisons have in the debate round, we directly talk about it better than the affirmative. They sit and talk about the social service they're providing. We're saying they put a band-aid on the shotgun wound by not addressing this argument that my partner said in the 1NC, where he talks about much like the William Paxton Rodriguez 2007 arguments that have ontological implications. We're saying that the very act of having a prison is an ontological violence. It's a violence against human nature itself, to put us in a cage and to lock us up. This is again, they never talked about this in the 1AC. So he sits and argues about the fact that we solve for it, but he never talks about it. That's the whole point. You're putting a band-aid on a shotgun wound by not even talking about the dehumanized effects that go on in prison. They sit here and talk about rape, but they never magnify that in the narrative. They just sit there and use those narratives as commodities to push the ideal. And again, where the reason why we push our arguments through the methodology of praxis. Basically, they keep pushing our arguments, the mechanism, only through narrative. This is not true. If you look at our theory and our narrative, basically what praxis means is work to the point theory and narrative comes together. They're gonna basically throughout this debate, they're gonna basically keep trying to say that the narrative is the only mechanism in which we make change. It's the only way to solve. It's the only way they do it. So they come up here and read these arguments, basically talk about, oh yeah, they're bad because they use their own individual connections. Basically, all we're saying is the only why we use our narrative because it makes it easier for you guys to understand the theory of capitalism as it relates to in the real world. This is again why we're better than them. And they want to talk about what change we make. Again, like I said, of course, what's the best place to talk about capitalism and shortcomings in a bank, J.P. Morgan of all places? What's the best way to talk about capitalism in the center of it all? In New York City, where there's like TVs and lights everywhere. So we say we're the center of the beast. If you want to fight the system, you go in the system and fight it in the debate round. That's what we're doing in the debate round. That's what we're doing in our practice. And this is again why we're better than affirmative in any way. Again, we'll go back to the line by line when he says capitalism is another ability. I have a with asserting capitalism and inevitability mystifies the construct nature of the system, nationalized subjugation to capital. Marshall 1995, the self-serving slogan that there is no alternative is also coupled with an equal tenderest clause of self-justification which proclaims that in the real world there can be no alternative to advocate course of action or inaction. This proposition is supposed to be self-evident truth, automatically expeding all those who continue to assert is from making inconvenience themselves with burden of truth. For the structural defects of the explosive autonomism of the world in which we actually happen to live in, we are apologetically sorry. You can mark it. Oh. Announce.
Okay, so first, you say that we use certain language that crushes you and your voice, right?
Well, when you say we don't make any change, like you know,
Specify the language we use.
well, when in 2AC you said policy is the only way to make any direct change, you directly say that. That's exactly what Tony Morrison talking about by saying those dominant languages